My name is Amber, and if you had asked me a year ago whether I trusted my husband with my entire heart, I would have said yes without hesitation. We had been together for nearly 7 years, and I thought I knew him better than I knew myself. We built a life together that, from the outside, seemed picture perfect. People envied our home, our vacations, the way we smiled in photos. But photos can be deceiving, and smiles can hide the deepest cracks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story like this. And of course, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading them. I started noticing small changes first. The kind of details that seem harmless at first glance, but when you look back, they paint a picture you don't want to see. He began staying late at work more often than usual. At first, he told me it was because of a big project, deadlines piling up, or his boss needing extra help. I believed him. After all, why wouldn't I? He was my husband. But then there were the phone calls. Short, hushed conversations where he'd step outside or lower his voice. If I asked who it was, he'd say, "Oh, just work, or my brother." The kind of answers that sound normal until you realize you're hearing them too often. And then came the excuses, sudden meetings, forgotten commitments, late-night texts he wouldn't let me see. One night, as I was folding laundry, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It lit up with a name I didn't recognize. I remember feeling my chest tighten, but I convinced myself not to open it. Trust, right? That's what marriage is built on. But even though I didn't look, the unease wouldn't go away. It sat in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me, whispering that something wasn't right. The turning point came when he left his laptop open one morning. He usually closed everything before heading to work, but this time, maybe he was in a rush. An email caught my eye, and not because I was looking for it, but because it was right there, bold and unread. The subject line said, "Last night was unforgettable." I wish I could say I didn't click, but I did. And what I saw made my whole body go cold. There were messages between him and another woman. Nothing graphic, but enough to make me see the truth. Compliments, promises, inside jokes. He had been seeing her for weeks, maybe months. And the worst part was that he wrote things to her that he hadn't said to me in a long time. I shut the laptop so hard I thought I'd broken it. My hands were shaking. My mind raced with questions. Why wasn't I enough? How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional, or was it physical too? I wanted to scream, to throw things, to confront him the second he walked through the door. But something stopped me. A quiet voice in my head said, "Don't rush. Don't show your hand yet." I don't know where that calm came from, but it was like a survival instinct. I decided right then that if he could lie to me, I would wait until I had everything I needed. Evidence he couldn't deny. Proof that would show him I wasn't blind or weak. That's when I remembered something, a small camera we had bought months earlier for security after a break-in scare in our neighborhood. It was sitting in a drawer, unused. I knew then exactly what I had to do. I spent that entire day setting it up. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was discreet enough to hide in the living room bookshelf. I angled it toward the couch, where he always sat when he came home from work. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I probably wouldn't catch anything. But some part of me knew. The first few days, nothing happened. He came home, we ate dinner, he scrolled through his phone like always. But then, one Thursday night, everything changed. I had gone to bed early, pretending I wasn't feeling well. He stayed up, and I could hear the faint murmur of his voice in the living room. The next morning, after he left for work, I checked the camera. And there it was. He was sitting on the couch, grinning at his phone like a teenager in love. The video showed him speaking softly, calling someone baby, telling them he missed them. He even laughed in that warm way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Watching it felt like knives in my chest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. It was the confirmation I needed, even if it shattered me. I spent hours staring at that footage. A part of me wanted to confront him right then, shove the proof in his face, and demand answers. But another part of me, maybe the stronger part, realized that if I played this right, I could turn the situation around completely. So I waited. I started keeping track, saving clips, logging the times, noting patterns. He thought he was clever, thought he was hiding it well. But every time he smirked at his phone, every time he whispered in another room, my camera was catching it. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. What he didn't know was that his secret wasn't just unraveling, it was about to explode in a way he never saw coming. And as I gathered more and more evidence, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore. I was preparing for a moment, a revelation that would turn the tables completely. I told myself, he thought no one knew. But the camera would reveal every lie. The hardest part of living with what I now knew was pretending that nothing had changed. Every morning, I still made coffee like always, smiled at him when he walked into the kitchen, and kissed him goodbye as he left for work. But inside, every gesture felt hollow. I knew his secrets now, and yet, he thought he was getting away with it. That irony gave me strength. The footage from the camera became my secret world. Every day after he left, I'd sit down with my laptop and watch the recordings, my stomach in knots, my hands clammy with anticipation. Some days, there would be nothing more than him scrolling or eating dinner. Other days, I'd see him whispering into his phone, chuckling in a way that used to be reserved for me. And then came the night that shattered any lingering doubts. It was late, close to midnight. I had gone upstairs to bed early again, pretending I was tired. He stayed behind in the living room. When I checked the footage the next morning, I saw him with a glass of wine in hand, leaning back on the couch, smiling at his phone. But then, he said something that made my blood run cold. He whispered, "I can't wait to see you again." Last time was amazing. There it was. No more guessing, no more wondering if it was just emotional. The way he said it, the tone in his voice, the grin on his face, it told me everything I needed to know. I paused the footage and just sat there staring at the screen. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. But then something strange happened. Instead of falling apart, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. It was as though I had crossed some invisible line. I wasn't in the dark anymore. I had the truth. And with truth came power. Still, I couldn't just explode yet. Not without planning. If I confronted him too soon, he'd deny it, twist things around, maybe even make me feel like I was imagining it. That's what people like him did, shift blame, turn the tables, confuse you until you doubted yourself. No, I wasn't going to give him that chance. I was going to be ready. So I kept gathering evidence. Clip after clip. Notes in my journal. Every time he called her baby, every time he promised her things, every moment he thought he was being clever. I became almost obsessed, but I told myself it was necessary. And as the days passed, I began to notice patterns. He always called her late at night. He never used his laptop for her, just his phone. And he had a habit of disappearing on Saturday afternoons, claiming he was running errands. One particular Saturday, I decided to test something. When he said he needed to pick up some supplies for work, I smiled and offered to come with him. His face froze for just a second, but then he quickly recovered and said, "Oh no, it'll be boring. I'll be quick." I nodded like I believed him, but the second he drove off, I followed. I didn't tail him directly. I wasn't reckless. Instead, I waited a few minutes, then got in my car and drove toward the direction I knew he'd go. My heart was pounding the entire time, but I told myself I had to see for myself. I spotted his car parked outside a cafe, not a supply store. And there he was, sitting by the window, leaning across the table with a woman I'd never seen before. She was smiling, touching his hand, and he looked at her like she was the center of the universe. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to take it all in. I didn't confront him. I didn't storm in or make a scene. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took pictures. Proof. Evidence. Another piece of the puzzle he thought he could keep hidden. When I got home, I sat on the couch staring at the photos. It felt surreal. This man who shared my home, who laughed with me, who kissed me goodnight, was also living another life, right under my nose. But now, the difference was that I was watching, recording, documenting. He had no idea the walls were closing in on him. That night, when he came home and kissed my cheek, I almost laughed. He smelled faintly of her perfume, though he tried to cover it with cologne. I wanted to scream, to shove the photos in his face. But I stayed calm. Because I had bigger plans. You see, the thing about betrayal is that it changes you. It makes you see people differently. But in my case, it also awakened something in me I didn't know I had, the ability to strategize, to think several steps ahead. I knew now that I wasn't just collecting proof for myself. I was building a case, one that would ensure he couldn't talk his way out of it. Over the next couple of weeks, I refined my plan. The camera stayed on, recording every whispered conversation. I backed up everything onto a separate hard drive, just in case. I even started reading up on legal advice, learning what kind of evidence could matter if this turned into something bigger. He thought I was oblivious, but in reality, I was preparing for the moment the curtain would drop. And then, almost as if the universe was pushing things along, he made a mistake. One evening, he left his phone charging in the kitchen while he took a shower. Normally, he guarded it like a hawk, never letting it out of his sight. But this time, maybe he was careless, or maybe he was too confident. Either way, I saw the screen light up with a message. It said, "I miss you already. Same time next week?" My heart stopped. My fingers itched to unlock the phone, to see the whole thread, but I knew better. If I crossed that line, he'd know someone had been snooping. Instead, I snapped a quick picture of the screen and put the phone back exactly as it was. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at that photo on my phone. She was asking about next week. That meant this wasn't ending anytime soon. He wasn't planning on stopping. And that was the final push I needed. Because I realized something, he thought he was in control. He thought he could juggle two lives and I'd never know. But what he didn't realize was that every smile, every lie, every whispered word was being captured. And when the time was right, I would be the one holding all the cards. So I waited. Patiently. Quietly. Pretending everything was normal, while behind the scenes, the trap was tightening around him. He thought no one knew. But soon, the camera would reveal every single lie, and he'd have nowhere left to hide. The more I watched him live his double life, the more I realized how far he'd gone. It wasn't just late-night calls or quick meetups anymore. He had started making excuses for entire weekends. He'd talk about work trips or client meetings, and I'd nod like the perfect partner, while inside, I was memorizing every detail, every lie, every timeline. The funny thing was, he had no idea how obvious he'd become to me. He thought he was clever, but when you're hiding something, you leave cracks. I saw them everywhere now. He'd smile at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd step outside to take a call but keep his voice low. Once, when I asked him an innocent question about his day, he stumbled. He couldn't remember the story he'd told me the day before. Those little cracks became my strength. The camera footage remained my anchor. I'd sit at my desk, headphones in, watching him whisper to her like a love-struck teenager. Sometimes he'd even say her name. That, strangely, hurt the most. The way he said it softly, almost reverently, the way he used to say mine years ago. But instead of crying, I saved the clips. Every time he slipped, every time he forgot that the truth was watching, I made sure it was stored safely. It's strange how betrayal rewires you. I began moving differently in my own house. I started hiding my emotions behind a mask so perfect even he couldn't tell. I laughed when he cracked jokes. I made him his favorite meals. I kissed him goodnight like nothing was wrong. But in my mind, I wasn't his partner anymore. I was the one observing him, studying him, preparing for the day he'd learn the truth. One night, something happened that nearly broke my act. He came home later than usual, his shirt wrinkled, his hair messy, his cologne stronger than ever. I asked how his day went, and he gave me the same rehearsed story about working late. But then he pulled me close, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." For a moment, my throat tightened. How could he say those words to me after spending his evening with her? The cruelty of it, the audacity, it almost made me crack. But then I remembered the footage, the photos, the text message, and I smiled sweetly and said, "I'm glad you think so." The truth is, I wasn't just waiting anymore, I was planning the reveal. I knew I couldn't just scream it out one day and expect satisfaction. No, I wanted him to see everything with his own eyes. I wanted the weight of his own words, his own actions, to crash down on him so hard he couldn't deny it. So I started designing the trap. First, I organized all the recordings into folders labeled by date. I cut together small clips that showed the progression, from the first late-night calls to the cafe meeting, to the whispering promises. Then I created a backup on a hidden drive. If he somehow found one, the other would still exist. At the same time, I started preparing myself. I looked into finances, made quiet calls to an attorney, and learned what it would mean if I walked away. I didn't know yet if I would leave him, but I wanted to be ready. Because deep down, I already knew, once he saw the truth laid bare, there would be no going back. But here's the thing I didn't expect. Keeping this secret turned me into someone stronger than I'd ever been. Before, I thought of myself as quiet, maybe even too forgiving. But now, every smile I gave him while holding his lies in my pocket made me feel powerful. He thought I was naive. He thought I was blind. And that made the coming reveal even sweeter. One Saturday afternoon, I finally tested part of my plan. He told me he'd be gone for a business meeting. I acted normal, waved him goodbye, and then pulled out my phone to check the camera feed remotely. Sure enough, an hour later, he wasn't in a meeting, he was at our house again, pacing the living room, waiting. And then the front door opened, and she walked in. My heart dropped into my stomach. She was in my house. The place I decorated, the place I cleaned, the place I thought was safe. She laughed as she hugged him, and he kissed her like they were in their own little world. I sat there, shaking, but I didn't cry. Instead, I hit record. I captured every second as they sat on my couch, sipping wine, talking about how careful they had to be. It was almost surreal, watching it unfold live. They were bold, reckless even, because he thought I was far away. He thought I'd never know. But I was watching. And now, I had the kind of evidence no one could deny. When they finally left, I sat back and let out a long breath. My hands were trembling, but my resolve had never been stronger. It wasn't just whispers on the phone anymore, it was her, in my home. That was the line. And once I saw it crossed, I knew the time for patience was almost over. That evening, when he came home and smiled at me like nothing had happened, I felt something inside me shift. He still believed his secret was safe. He still thought I was the trusting partner who never suspected a thing. But little did he know, I now had every piece of the puzzle. I didn't confront him that night. Not yet. Instead, I waited until he fell asleep, then quietly backed up the new footage, labeling it final proof. I looked at the folders on my laptop, at the hours of recordings, the pictures, the messages. It was all there. Enough to tear down the facade he'd built and show him exactly what he'd done. And as I closed the laptop, a calm smile spread across my face. Because soon, very soon, the lies he thought were invisible would come crashing down on him in the most undeniable way. He thought no one knew. He thought he was safe. But the truth was watching him, recording him, waiting for the right moment. And I was the one holding the key to it all. The night I caught them in my house replayed in my head over and over. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened, but not with sadness, no, with determination. That was the line they crossed. And now I wasn't just gathering proof anymore. I was preparing the stage for the final act. I started noticing little things about him differently after that night. The way he hummed while brushing his teeth, the way he'd casually ask what was for dinner, the way he'd check his phone under the table, all those things used to feel normal. Now they felt like lies wrapped in routine. And the strangest part, pretending everything was fine became easier for me, almost natural. I guess once you accept someone's betrayal, it's no longer shocking. It just becomes a performance. And oh, what a performance I was giving him. I began slipping subtle changes into our life. At first, tiny things, a new folder on the bookshelf, my laptop always in the same spot on the table, little post-it notes here and there. None of it was suspicious, but everything had a purpose. I wanted to see if he'd notice. He didn't. He was too distracted living his double life to realize I was carefully shaping the pieces around him. I also started planning the moment itself. It wasn't enough to just throw the evidence in his face. I wanted it to unravel in front of him, slowly, leaving no room for denial. I pictured the shock in his eyes when he saw himself on screen, when he heard his own voice whispering promises he thought were secret. The thought of it kept me steady. But the universe, it seemed, wanted to test me one last time. A week after I caught them in my house, he came home unusually cheerful. He carried a small gift bag, handed it to me, and said, "You deserve this." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Something simple, yet meaningful. He smiled at me like he was the perfect husband, like he hadn't just desecrated our marriage in the most personal way. I almost laughed. The irony was too sharp. He thought a bracelet could cover up the weight of what I knew. But I played my part. I gasped, thanked him, kissed his cheek. Inside, though, I felt something else entirely. It wasn't love, and it wasn't anger. It was power. Because while he handed me that gift with a smile, I had another gift for him, waiting. A gift far heavier than silver. Meanwhile, the camera kept recording. He grew bolder, more careless, thinking he had me fooled. Twice more, he brought her to the house when he claimed to be working late. Each time, I saved the footage. Each time, my plan became sharper. I could have confronted him after the first slip, but no, I wanted him comfortable, unprepared, certain that I was blind. That way, when I finally pulled the curtain, the fall would be that much harder. One night, I called my best friend over. I hadn't told anyone until then, but the weight of the secret needed sharing. We sat in my kitchen, and I showed her everything, the folders, the recordings, the messages. Her eyes widened, and she kept whispering, "Oh my God." She begged me to throw him out immediately, but I shook my head. "Not yet," I told her. "I need him to see it himself. I need him to know I knew all along." She didn't fully understand why I was waiting, but she supported me. That gave me even more strength. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the truth alone. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. The perfect setup practically delivered itself. He suggested we host a small dinner at home for some of his close friends and colleagues. My heart skipped, because I realized this was it. The perfect audience. The moment where his carefully constructed facade would crumble in front of the people who thought they knew him. I agreed with a smile, telling him it was a great idea. Inside, I was already planning every detail. When the day came, I prepared everything flawlessly. The table was set beautifully, the food arranged perfectly, the wine chilled. He thought he was the star of the evening, laughing and chatting with his friends, while I played the gracious host. But what he didn't know was that my laptop, carefully connected to the big screen in the living room, held the real entertainment for the night. As the dinner went on, I studied him. The way he held court with his stories, the way he painted himself as the hardworking, loyal man, it almost made me admire his acting. Almost. But I knew the truth was sitting in my pocket, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. After dessert, I stood up, smiling, and said, "There's something I'd like to share." Everyone turned toward me, curious. He looked a little surprised, but still smiling, because he trusted me completely. That trust was about to shatter. I picked up the remote and clicked. The big screen lit up. At first, it was just a black background with the title, "What Happens When No One Is Watching." His smile faded slightly, but he still didn't suspect. Then the first clip played. Him, whispering on the phone, calling her by name. The room went silent. He froze. His fork slipped from his hand, clattering onto the plate. His face drained of color as the second clip began, him, meeting her at the cafe, leaning in too close, laughing like a schoolboy. A murmur spread around the table. His friends exchanged looks, shocked and confused. And then came the final clip, the one that sealed everything. Him and her, sitting on our couch, in our living room, glasses of wine in hand, talking about how careful they had to be. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The footage spoke louder than anything I could have ever shouted. When the clip ended, I simply looked at him. His mouth opened, then closed again. He stammered something, an excuse, maybe, or a denial, but no words came out. His colleagues sat in stunned silence. And in that moment, as he realized his entire world had just collapsed in front of an audience, I felt a calm like I'd never felt before. This was it. This was the trap snapping shut. He thought no one knew. He thought he was safe. But I had been watching all along. And now, the lies weren't just exposed, they were undeniable. The room was silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even the uncomfortable shifting of chairs as people avoided looking directly at him. My husband, this man who once stood so tall, so sure of himself, was now frozen in his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly on the table. No one spoke at first. His friends glanced at me, then at him, then back again, as though waiting for someone to break the unbearable silence. Finally, one of them cleared his throat and muttered, "Man, is this real?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The clips had been enough proof, raw, undeniable truth that couldn't be explained away. He finally tried to speak. "Amber, this isn't, it's not what it looks like." His voice cracked, desperate, almost pleading. But then one of his own colleagues turned to him and asked bluntly, "So, who's the woman in the video then?" "Your coworker?" His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He had no defense. And the thing about lies is, once the curtain is pulled back, you can't shove it down again. The truth had already spread around that room, and there was no undoing it. I stood calmly, collected, my heart steady. For months, he had held this power over me, hiding behind his false smiles and fake reassurances. And in one night, with a click of a remote, all of it came crashing down. "I wanted you all to see," I finally said, my voice steady but firm. "Because sometimes people wear masks so well, they fool everyone around them. But not anymore. Not here." A murmur spread across the table. A couple of his colleagues excused themselves quickly, muttering something about an early morning. His closest friend looked at him with disappointment, shaking his head before standing and leaving without another word. One by one, they left, until it was just me, him, and the sound of the front door closing behind the last guest. He turned to me then, his face twisted with anger and panic. "Why would you do that? In front of everyone?" You humiliated me. I almost laughed. Humiliated you? You did that to yourself the moment you brought her into our home. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. For a second, I thought he might try to lash out, but then he slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He looked smaller somehow, broken. For the first time, I saw him without the mask, without the charm, without the lies. Just a man who had gambled everything on secrecy and lost. I can explain, he began again, but I cut him off. Don't insult me any further with explanations I don't need. I've heard enough. I've seen enough. And so has everyone else. The silence that followed was heavy, final. That night, he slept on the couch while I locked myself in the bedroom. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The storm had already passed, and I was standing in its calm center. The next morning, he was still there, looking disheveled, his eyes red from a sleepless night. He tried again. Apologies, promises, desperate pleas. He swore he'd change, swore it meant nothing, swore he'd make it right. But his words meant nothing to me anymore. They were just noise, empty air filling the space between us. I don't want your apologies, I told him quietly. I want my life back. And I'll be taking it. He looked confused at first, but then his eyes widened. You can't mean divorce. I met his gaze firmly. I do. And I'm not asking. I'm telling you. He panicked then, pacing the room, his hands pulling at his hair. Amber, please. You can't do this. Everyone will think. Everyone already knows, I interrupted sharply. That's the beauty of it. You don't get to spin this story. You don't get to twist the truth. They saw it with their own eyes. Your mask is gone. He stopped pacing, his face hardening, anger flashing in his eyes. You think you've won? He hissed. You think humiliating me fixes anything? I tilted my head slightly, calm and unbothered. It doesn't fix anything. But it sets me free. That's enough for me. He stormed out of the house that morning, slamming the door behind him, leaving me in silence. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a beginning. Over the next few days, word spread quickly. Friends called me, some shocked, some supportive, some quietly admitting they had always sensed something was off about him. His colleagues distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with his disgrace. And him? He tried to reach out, messages, calls, even showing up at the house once, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to anymore. Instead, I focused on myself. On the woman who had been buried beneath years of lies, the woman who had been doubting her own instincts. I realized she was stronger than I ever gave her credit for. The divorce papers were drafted within a week. I handed them to him without ceremony. He tried one last time, begging, swearing he'd change. But I had already changed. I wasn't the same woman who doubted herself, who questioned her worth. I was done playing in his shadow. When he finally signed the papers, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The chains he had wrapped around me, chains of lies, manipulation, betrayal, were gone. I was free. But freedom wasn't just about leaving him. It was about choosing me. Choosing honesty, peace, and dignity over living in someone else's deception. Looking back, I don't regret a single thing. Not the camera, not the waiting, not the dramatic reveal. Because it wasn't just about catching him. It was about reminding myself that truth has power. That no matter how carefully lies are hidden, the truth always finds a way out. And when it does, it doesn't just expose them. It frees you. The day I walked out of that house for the last time, suitcase in hand, I remember pausing at the doorway. It wasn't sadness that held me there, it was clarity. The walls, the furniture, the framed photos on the shelves, they weren't just reminders of a marriage anymore. They were symbols of how much of myself I had lost while pretending everything was fine. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't losing a home. I was reclaiming myself. It wasn't easy. I'd be lying if I said it was. Divorce isn't just paperwork, it's untangling your life from someone else's, piece by piece, until you're left standing with nothing but your own reflection. There were mornings I woke up and wondered if I'd made a mistake, if maybe forgiving him would have been easier. But then I'd remember the tape. I'd remember the lies. I'd remember the way he looked at me as though I was the fool for catching him. And that doubt melted away. Friends came and went during this time. Some couldn't handle the drama, some didn't know what to say, and some, well, they showed up in ways I'll never forget. A neighbor dropped off groceries the week I moved into my new apartment. My coworker helped me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaint. And slowly, I realized that while I had lost one person, I hadn't lost everyone. People still cared. Life still went on. What surprised me most was how light I felt once the dust settled. For so long, I thought my happiness depended on him, on us. I thought if I could just be patient enough, forgiving enough, loving enough, he'd change. But the truth is, love can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. And staying in that illusion was only breaking me. I remember one night, sitting on the balcony of my new place with a cup of tea in my hands, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because I had won some battle or proved a point, but because I had chosen myself. That realization was both terrifying and beautiful. Meanwhile, his life unraveled in ways I couldn't have imagined. The colleagues who once laughed at his jokes stopped returning his calls. His so-called friends distanced themselves, whispering behind his back about the scandal. Even his family, who had always defended him, couldn't ignore the evidence. I didn't celebrate his downfall, though. I didn't need to. Watching him face the consequences of his own choices was enough. The camera didn't just catch his betrayal, it caught my turning point. It was the moment I stopped letting someone else's lies define my reality. And that's something I'll never regret. People often ask me if I'd ever take him back, if time and regret could heal what he broke. My answer is simple, no. Because the moment I forgave him would be the moment I betrayed myself. And I've already done enough of that. Instead, I chose to build again. Slowly, carefully, brick by brick, I started creating a life that was mine alone. I poured myself into my work, into friendships, into rediscovering hobbies I'd abandoned. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of, stood barefoot on beaches I once thought I'd never see. And each experience reminded me, I was more than what he reduced me to. The hardest part wasn't leaving him. It was leaving the version of me that thought I wasn't enough without him. That version died the moment the camera revealed the truth. And in its place, a stronger, wiser woman was born. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself replaying the look on his face when the video ended. That mixture of shock, guilt, and panic. It used to haunt me. Now, it empowers me. Because it reminds me that no matter how carefully lies are hidden, they can never erase the truth. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to take away from my story, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't let anyone make you doubt the voice inside you. And don't ever let someone's lies make you forget your worth. The night I pressed play on that video, I didn't just expose him. I set myself free. And that freedom? It's priceless. So if you're ever standing where I once stood, confused, doubting, torn between love and truth, choose truth. Always. Because love built on lies isn't love at all. As for me, I don't know exactly what the future holds. But I know this much: it's mine. My story, my choices, my freedom. And after everything I've been through, that's more than enough. Because sometimes, the most painful endings are really just the most powerful beginnings.